In a quiet neighborhood in 2018, a terrible crime shocked the community. Two sisters, Anna and Megan Harper, had lived side by side for years, but hidden beneath the surface was a deep grudge. The older sister, Anna, had carried painful memories from their childhood memories of abuse that she felt had been ignored by her family, especially by her younger sister, Megan. For years, these emotions built up inside her, but no one ever knew just how deeply Anna had been hurt. Then, one fateful night, everything came to a tragic end. Fueled by anger and a desire for revenge, Anna decided to confront her sister, leading to a violent and deadly confrontation. Megan, the sister who seemed to have it all, became the victim of a murder that no one saw coming. This is the story of a sibling rivalry that turned deadly, a tale of long-buried pain, family secrets, and a tragic ending that tore a family apart. What drove Anna to commit such a terrible crime against her own flesh and blood? And could this tragedy have been prevented? The story that follows unravels the chilling events leading up to the night of the murder and the investigation that uncovered years of hidden resentment. Anna Harper always felt like an outsider in her own family. Growing up in a small, close-knit town, the Harper family was well regarded by their neighbors, who saw them as the picture of a hard-working, loving family. Her father, David, ran a small but busy auto repair shop and was known for being reliable and good with his hands. Her mother, Judith, stayed home, managing the household and taking care of her two daughters. From the outside, their lives seemed normal, ordinary, even, but behind closed doors, Anna experienced something entirely different. David Harper was a man of few words, but the ones he did speak often stung. He was strict, quick to criticize, and slow to offer any kind of praise. He had grown up in hard circumstances, working from a young age, and believed that discipline was the only way to raise children. His harsh, emotionally distant approach left Anna feeling unloved and unsupported. Judith, while less harsh, was absorbed in her own issues, her health, her past, and her deep unhappiness with the life she found herself living. She often dismissed Anna's concerns or avoided confronting the tension in the house, always opting for silence over conflict. In contrast, Megan, Anna's younger sister, seemed to thrive in the same environment. Megan was everything Anna wasn't. She was outgoing, confident, and seemed to have an effortless way of winning their parents' approval. David doted on Megan, calling her his little star and often excusing her from the responsibilities that fell on Anna. Judith praised Megan's looks and accomplishments, always beaming with pride when Megan did something as small as win a school award or perform well in a dance recital. To Judith and David, Megan could do no wrong, and her successes only heightened Anna's feelings of inadequacy and resentment. As they grew older, the divide between the sisters widened. While Megan was popular at school, surrounded by friends and boys who vied for her attention, Anna withdrew into herself. She spent most of her time in her room, reading books or scribbling in journals where she poured out her frustration and anger. School was a refuge for Anna, but even there she struggled to find her place. She was smart, but the pressure of her father's constant criticism weighed heavily on her. She rarely shared her thoughts or feelings with anyone, least of all her family. The more she withdrew, the more distant her relationship with her parents and sister became. By the time they were teenagers, the favoritism in the Harper household had become glaringly obvious. David often berated Anna for being too moody or sensitive, criticizing her for what he saw as a lack of resilience. He would tell her to stop complaining, that life wasn't fair, and that she needed to toughen up. On the other hand, Megan was given free rein. She was allowed to stay out late, date whomever she pleased, and was rarely scolded for anything. Judith's constant attention and praise for Megan only deepened the rift. Anna's resentment simmered quietly, but as the years passed, that simmering turned into a boiling rage. In her late teens, Anna attempted to open up to her mother about how neglected and unloved she felt, hoping Judith would finally recognize the emotional pain she had carried for so long. She tried to explain how David's constant criticism had damaged her self-esteem, how she felt invisible compared to Megan, and how much she needed her mother's support. But Judith, as always, brushed off Anna's feelings, telling her that she was overreacting, that David was just tired from work, and that she needed to stop being so sensitive. Judith's refusal to acknowledge her pain left Anna feeling even more isolated. Megan, meanwhile, seemed to sail through life with ease. After high school, she moved to the city, pursued a degree in marketing, and quickly climbed the corporate ladder. She married a successful lawyer and had 2 children, all while maintaining the image of the perfect wife and mother. Every holiday or family event was an opportunity for Megan to showcase her success, further cementing her position as the golden child in the Harper family. Anna's life took a different path. She stayed in the small town, working at a local grocery store to make ends meet. She never married, and her relationships were few and far between. She felt trapped, stuck in the same town with the same memories of a childhood that had left her emotionally scarred. The contrast between her life and Megan's only fueled her resentment. Each time Megan visited with her perfect family, Anna felt her blood boil. Megan had everything she had ever wanted: love, success, and a family that adored her, while Anna had been left to pick up the emotional pieces of their shared past. As adults, Anna and Megan barely spoke. Their once bonded relationship as children had been replaced by cold, infrequent interactions. Anna kept her distance, unable to stomach the sight of Megan's seemingly perfect life. But deep down, her anger festered, growing darker with each passing year. While Megan appeared to have moved on from their troubled childhood, Anna couldn't let go of the pain. She blamed Megan for being blind to her suffering, for never standing up for her, and for living a life free of the emotional scars that had defined Anna's existence. Anna's quiet rage remained hidden, but it was always there, bubbling beneath the surface, waiting for a moment to erupt. The family reunion that would set the stage for tragedy was Judith's idea. Her health had been declining for several years, and she feared that she didn't have much time left. She wanted one last chance to bring her family together, to heal old wounds before it was too late. David had grown even more withdrawn in his old age, his gruff demeanor intact, though his physical strength was fading. Despite the strained relationships between the sisters, Judith insisted that both Anna and Megan come home for the reunion. Megan arrived at the Harper home in her usual polished fashion. She was accompanied by her husband, a tall, handsome man who worked as a lawyer, and their 2 children, both perfectly dressed and well-behaved. Megan was the picture of success, her blonde hair styled neatly, her clothes expensive yet tasteful. She breezed into the house, greeting her parents with hugs and smiles, her laughter filling the room. It was clear that Megan was still the favorite, the daughter who had done everything right. Anna arrived later, alone. She looked different, thinner, more tired. Her dark brown hair was unkempt, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. She felt like an outsider from the moment she walked through the door. As soon as she stepped into the house, the old feelings of resentment returned. Watching her parents fawn over Megan and her children was like reopening an old wound. Anna tried to participate in the conversation, but it was clear that she didn't belong. Her contributions were ignored, her presence barely acknowledged. The dinner that followed was uncomfortable for Anna. Megan dominated the conversation, talking about her life in the city, her work, and her children's accomplishments. Judith and David hung on every word, their faces lighting up with pride. Anna, seated at the far end of the table, felt invisible. Every time she tried to speak, her voice was drowned out by Megan's anecdotes. The more Megan talked, the more Anna's anger grew. She couldn't bear to listen to Megan boast about her perfect life any longer. Megan's attempts to include Anna in the conversation felt insincere, as if she were doing it out of obligation rather than genuine interest. Megan asked Anna about her job, but her tone was condescending, as though she couldn't imagine why anyone would stay in their small town when there was so much more to life. Anna's answers were short and curt, her frustration bubbling to the surface. She could feel the eyes of her parents on her, judging her, wondering why she couldn't be more like Megan. By the time dessert was served, Anna had had enough. The years of feeling neglected, unloved, and invisible had built up inside her, and she could no longer contain her anger. The conversation around the table blurred into background noise as Anna focused on Megan's voice, the voice that had always overshadowed hers, the voice that had always been praised while hers was silenced. After dinner, the family moved into the living room to continue their conversation, but Anna couldn't stay there any longer. She needed to confront Megan, to finally release the anger that had been festering inside her for so long. She pulled Megan aside, leading her into the backyard where they could talk privately. The cool night air did little to calm Anna's nerves as she prepared herself for the confrontation that had been years in the making. At first, the conversation between the sisters was calm, though tense. Anna asked Megan if she remembered their childhood, if she remembered how their father had treated her, how he had always favored Megan while belittling Anna. Megan, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, tried to downplay it. She told Anna that everyone had their struggles growing up, that it was just part of life. But Megan's dismissive attitude only fueled Anna's anger. Anna's voice grew louder as she accused Megan of being blind to the pain she had suffered, of never standing up for her, of living a carefree life while Anna had been left to bear the emotional scars of their childhood. Megan, trying to remain composed, told Anna that she needed to move on, that holding on to the past was only hurting her. But for Anna, it wasn't that simple. She couldn't just move on. The pain of their childhood had defined her life, and Megan's refusal to acknowledge it felt like another betrayal. As Megan tried to brush off Anna's accusations, the years of pent-up anger that Anna had kept hidden finally exploded. In that moment, she wasn't just angry at Megan, she was angry at their entire family, at their father for his harshness, at their mother for her neglect, and at Megan for living a life free of the pain that had consumed Anna. The night, which had begun as an attempt to heal old wounds, was about to take a deadly turn. The confrontation between Anna and Megan, which had started as a tense conversation about their past, quickly spiraled out of control. The years of resentment, neglect, and deep emotional pain that Anna had bottled up came rushing to the surface. Her voice, once controlled, became loud and piercing. She unleashed years of frustration and anger, accusing Megan of being blind to the suffering she endured. She pointed out how Megan had never intervened, never noticed, and never cared about the abuse from their father or the indifference from their mother. Megan, who was initially caught off guard by the confrontation, tried to remain calm. She had always seen herself as the peacemaker, the one who could bring stability to their chaotic family. But now, faced with Anna's seething anger, she was out of her depth. She took a deep breath, trying to diffuse the situation. She told Anna that their parents' actions weren't her fault, that Anna's anger toward her was misplaced. Megan admitted that their childhood wasn't perfect, but she insisted that everyone had to deal with their own share of difficulties. In her view, Anna was letting the past consume her, and it was time to move on. But to Anna, those words only felt like another dismissal. Once again, Megan was refusing to acknowledge the depth of Anna's pain. Anna had always felt that Megan's charm and ease with their parents had allowed her to escape the harsh reality that Anna had been forced to live through. While Megan had been their father's pride and joy, Anna had been the scapegoat, the forgotten child who bore the brunt of David's emotional abuse. And now, as Anna stood in the backyard staring at the sister who had seemingly had it all, something inside her broke. Megan's calm demeanor, her refusal to take responsibility for her part in Anna's suffering, only fueled Anna's rage. At that moment, Anna's world narrowed. All she could see was Megan, standing in front of her, living a life free of the burdens that had weighed Anna down for so many years. The years of feeling invisible, of watching Megan thrive while she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken self, had finally pushed her to the brink. Without warning, Anna grabbed the metal rake that had been leaning against the fence. It was a tool their father had used for years in the garden, a heavy, rusted implement that now felt like an extension of Anna's fury. She swung it with all the force she could muster, striking Megan across the side of the head. The sound of the impact was sickening, the metal connecting with bone. Megan stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock, as blood began to trickle down the side of her face. Megan, dazed and disoriented, reached up to touch the wound, her fingers coming away stained with blood. She looked at Anna, her expression one of disbelief. For a moment there was silence. Anna stood frozen, her chest heaving, her mind struggling to process what she had just done. But the sight of Megan, bloodied and vulnerable, did nothing to quench the rage that had been building inside her for years. In a blind fury, Anna swung the rake again, this time hitting Megan squarely in the head. The blow was harder than the first, the force of it knocking Megan to the ground. Her body crumpled on the grass, motionless. Blood pooled around her head, staining the ground beneath her. The silence that followed was deafening. Anna stood over her sister, breathing heavily, her mind racing as the adrenaline began to wear off. For a moment, Anna felt a strange sense of release. The years of bitterness and anger had been unleashed, and Megan was no longer standing over her, no longer dismissing her pain. But that feeling quickly faded, replaced by a growing sense of panic. Megan wasn't moving. Anna knelt down beside her, her hands trembling as she shook Megan's shoulder, trying to wake her up. But it was no use. Megan's eyes remained closed, her body limp and lifeless. As the reality of what she had done began to sink in, Anna's mind went blank. She didn't know what to do. She had never intended for things to go this far, had never imagined that a simple conversation would end in such violence. But now Megan was gone and there was no way to undo what had happened. The sound of Megan's body hitting the ground had been louder than Anna realized. Inside the house, David, Judith, and Megan's husband were gathered in the living room, unaware of the tragedy unfolding outside. But when they heard the commotion, Megan's husband was the first to rush to the backyard, his heart pounding with a sense of dread. When he stepped outside, the sight that greeted him was something out of a nightmare. His wife, the woman he had loved and built a life with, was lying motionless on the ground, blood pooling around her head, and standing over her was Anna, her hands stained with blood, her face pale and expressionless. Megan's husband shouted for help, his voice filled with panic as he ran to his wife's side. Judith and David followed quickly, with Judith collapsing to the ground the moment she saw her daughters. The weight of the scene was too much for her to bear. David, always the stoic one, stood frozen in place, his face pale as he tried to make sense of the horror before him. His daughters, the ones he had raised, were now at the center of a tragedy that he could never have imagined. Megan's husband immediately called 911, his voice shaking as he described what had happened. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as paramedics and police arrived at the house. The paramedics rushed to Megan's side, but it was clear that there was nothing they could do. Megan was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short in a violent act that no one could have predicted. Detective Lisa Romero, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years of experience, was assigned to the case. As she arrived at the Harper household, she was met with chaos. Judith was inconsolable, her sobs echoing through the backyard as she clutched David's arm for support. David, still in shock, offered little more than monosyllabic responses when questioned by officers. Megan's husband, devastated and struggling to hold back his tears, sat on the front steps, his face buried in his hands. But it was Anna who caught Detective Romero's attention. She sat quietly in the back of the police car, her hands cuffed, staring blankly ahead. There was no emotion on her face, no tears, no signs of remorse. She looked like a woman who had shut down, her mind unable to process the gravity of what she had done. Detective Romero quickly began gathering evidence. The backyard was cordoned off, and the forensic team got to work. The metal rake, still stained with blood, was taken as evidence, and photos were taken of the scene where Megan's body lay. The crime itself seemed straightforward, a crime of passion, born out of years of simmering resentment. But what troubled Detective Romero were the underlying motives. What had driven Anna to kill her own sister? What had pushed her to the point of no return? Inside the house, Detective Romero began interviewing the family. Judith, still in a state of shock, struggled to speak through her tears. She kept repeating that she didn't understand how things had gone so wrong. She had always known there was tension between the sisters, but she had never imagined it would end in violence. David, on the other hand, was more closed off. He stood stiffly by the door, his face pale and drawn, offering little more than short, curt answers. It was clear he was in denial, unwilling to accept the truth of what had happened between his daughters. Megan's husband, distraught and barely able to hold back his emotions, explained how the sisters had always had a strained relationship, but no one had ever expected it to escalate into something like this. He spoke of the tension that had been palpable at the family reunion, the way Anna had seemed on edge all night. He admitted that he had always sensed some resentment from Anna, but he had never imagined it would escalate into violence. Detective Romero turned her attention to Anna. During the initial interrogation, Anna was quiet, barely responding to the officer's questions. Her hands trembled slightly, and she avoided eye contact, staring at the table in front of her. When asked why she had attacked her sister, Anna simply muttered that she didn't know, that it had all happened so fast, and that she hadn't meant to hurt Megan. But as Detective Romero continued questioning her, the truth began to unravel. Anna talked about her childhood, about how she had always felt neglected and overlooked by her family. She described the emotional abuse she had suffered at the hands of her father, and the way her mother had ignored her cries for help. She spoke of how Megan had always been the favorite, the one who received all the attention and affection while she was left to fend for herself. Anna's voice cracked as she recounted the years of pain she had carried, the anger that had built up inside her, and how on that night it had all come to a head. Detective Romero listened carefully, piecing together the story of a woman who had been deeply wounded by her family. A woman who had never felt seen or heard. A woman who had harbored a grudge for years, until it finally exploded in a moment of rage. As the investigation wrapped up, Anna was charged with second-degree murder. The small town was in shock. News of the crime spread quickly, and everyone was talking about the Harper family. The sisters, once thought to be just another pair of siblings with typical rivalries, were now at the center of a horrific tragedy. the media descended on the town, eager to cover the sensational story of a sister's deadly revenge. In the months leading up to the trial, Anna remained in jail, awaiting her fate. During her time behind bars, she began to open up more about her past, speaking to a psychologist about the trauma she had endured. It became clear that Anna had been deeply affected by her childhood, and while her actions were inexcusable, they were a result of years of untreated emotional pain. She had been a ticking time bomb, and Megan's success, her seemingly perfect life, had been the final trigger that set everything in motion. At the trial, the prosecution painted Anna as a cold, calculating woman who had harbored a deep resentment toward her sister for years. They argued that the murder had been premeditated, that Anna had planned the attack as an act of revenge. They pointed to the fact that Anna had chosen a deadly weapon, a metal rake, and had struck Megan multiple times, leaving no doubt that she had intended to kill her. The defense, on the other hand, focused on Anna's mental state. They argued that she had been pushed to the breaking point by years of emotional abuse and neglect, that the murder had not been premeditated, but rather a tragic, impulsive act born out of deep-seated psychological trauma. They called on psychologists to testify about Anna's fragile mental health, explaining how she had been suffering in silence for years, unable to cope with the overwhelming pain of her childhood. Throughout the trial, Anna remained stoic. She showed little emotion, but there were moments when the weight of her actions seemed to hit her. She would glance at her parents, who sat in the courtroom every day, their faces etched with grief and confusion. Judith in particular seemed devastated, torn between the loss of one daughter and the knowledge that the other was responsible for the tragedy. As the trial came to a close, the jury was left with a difficult decision. Was Anna a cold-blooded killer, or was she a victim of her circumstances, pushed to commit a heinous crime by years of unresolved trauma? In the end, the jury found her guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging that, while her mental state may have played a role, the brutality of the crime could not be overlooked. Anna was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As she was led away in handcuffs, her parents watched in silence, their family forever broken by the events that had unfolded. Megan's husband and children were left to mourn the loss of a wife and mother, while the town tried to come to terms with the horrifying reality of what had happened in the Harper family. The story of Anna and Megan Harper serves as a chilling reminder of how deeply buried pain and unresolved trauma can lead to unimaginable consequences. What started as a sibling rivalry fueled by years of neglect and favoritism ended in a tragic act of violence that no one could have predicted. In the end, both sisters were victims, one of a brutal murder, and the other of a lifetime of emotional suffering that had finally erupted in the most tragic way possible.